Well, as you saw in the news, Liberals are gathered in convention in Montreal tonight, and Andrew and Althea are there watching. Bruce is in Ottawa tonight. Before I get any comments, I want to show you, we saw a couple of clips in Terry's item of Justin Trudeau tonight at the giving, I guess, what's now his stump speech. Here's another short clip from that speech, trying to set the tone for Liberal delegates. Watch this.
For almost a decade, we have had a federal government that has no answers to the economic problems that feed anxiety and uncertainty. When progress stalls, fear moves forward, and fear can only be beaten back with hope.
People are already calling that the hopey, changey part of the speech. But tell me, Althea, he's in a room full of Liberals, and it's the first big speech of the convention weekend. It's supposed to get people off their feet. Was it successful in doing that?
Well, it wasn't a barn burner speech. I think people almost seemed to come in with more enthusiasm than they left. But I don't really think that this was the speech really that was, the answer to all the questions that they came to hear. That's going to happen on Saturday. So I think this speech was, warm and fuzzy. And yes, it did give us a vision of Justin Trudeau as a family man. And of course, as you just mentioned, repeated oftentimes, he is the light and the opposition party is the darkness. And the government is the darkness. So, that didn't change. But there is one thing that struck me from this speech. He did take a shot at the PQ, and he said something that expanded on the middle class argument that we've heard. He said if things are going so badly for people that the PQ government here, that's probably going to have an election shortly, would never have thought of introducing something like the Charter of Quebec Values. This is the ban on all public employees wearing obvious religious symbols if things were going great. And the reason that we have such divisive politics is because things are going badly. And we haven't heard him say something like that as strongly yet.
Andrew, what did you make of it?
Well, I agree that was an interesting theme. I think it's a bit of a stretch for a couple of reasons. It's an attempt to yoke together two big themes, one of which is a traditional winner for the Liberals, which is unity, our diversity is our strength, and that kind of theme. And the other on the economy, where they at least hope to neutralize the Conservative advantage. And so what he's trying to do there is to yoke them together by saying it's because of weakness in the economy that we're seeing things like the Charter of Values. It's a stretch in two ways. One is I actually don't think that's what's behind the Charter of Values. I think it's much more to do with traditional Quebec identity concerns. And secondly, and this is a recurring argument, is this line that the middle class is going nowhere, that no one's had a pay raise in 30 years, is just factually incorrect. Real wages have never been as high as they are now. Family incomes have been rising for 20 years. Household net worth is at all-time levels. So it's a great talking point, and it's got lots of borrowed emphasis from the United States to back it up. It's just not actually true in Canada.
Bruce?
Well, Peter, my take is that he is not, or at least not yet, a powerful orator from the standpoint of a TV audience, although the audiences that he meets with, including, I guess, the folks in the room tonight, seem to like the way that he performs a speech well enough. I was really struck by a few things. I thought it was quiet. I thought it was low energy. I thought it was a bit understated. And it's easy sometimes to look at that and say, that's flat. But I found myself wondering whether understated isn't really part of the strategy. I think Mr. Trudeau is doubling down on this message of humility, hard work, and the idea of him as an average guy. And while his opponents keep on wanting him to pass a different test, a test that involves intellect and new ideas, substantive ideas, I couldn't help but remember that Brian Mulroney and Jean Chrétien and even Stephen Harper put a lot of their eggs in the hard work, humility, average guy basket, and it worked out pretty well for them too.
Let me show you another clip from the speech tonight. Here it is.
Fear and division can take root anywhere. My friends, I have no interest in joining Mr. Harper and Mr. Mulcair in a competition to see who can make Canadians angrier.
So that's another part, I guess, of what is the kind of stump speech to get, the party up off its feet. But at some point, and Althea, you hinted at this earlier, the call is you got to deliver something. Tell me what it is you stand for, how you would change things if you were leading the country. Are we going to see any of that this weekend?
I'm not sure. The big speech that we're told that's going to, have all these answers is on Saturday, where we expect actually a bit more of that compare and contrast between Justin Trudeau and the government. And we expect obviously more information on, what does he mean exactly by the middle class. He did release a video filled with little cartoons explaining, Justin Trudeau's vision of the economy, what our problems were, how to fix them. And in it, he said a few more things to give us an indication of where he's going. And I assume that he's going to hit on those themes on Saturday. In it, he talked about more money for post-secondary education, more investment in infrastructure. These are themes that we're constantly hearing from all the Liberals that are already here and caucus members. That suggests, how are you going to pay for all these things? Will you plunge us further into deficits and larger debt? There are no answers to those questions yet. The policy resolutions here are really about typical Liberal things, national strategies on everything from electricity to childcare. There are a lot of traditional ideas, the return of Kelowna Accord, for example. There are some controversial pieces of legislation. Well, they're not legislation, controversial policy resolutions that could perhaps become legislation. Euthanasia. We also have an idea for a basic income, annual income for poorer Canadians. But
All right,
the
but as you
party
say,
is
a lot
moving
of
away
these,
from that.
Yeah, a lot of these
Yeah.
things are what you tend to hear at conventions in terms of basic
Well, they're trying
issues.
to-
But in terms of
Yeah.
big picture stuff, Bruce, has he got to deliver something big this weekend?
I don't think he does this weekend, Peter. I think by the time the next election rolls around, he'll absolutely have to have some meat on the bone. But I think that it's folks like us who can't wait to have that meat on the bone to look at and scrutinize and criticize. And for the most part, I don't think it's bad political strategy for him to put a lot of his chips on this idea of hope and optimism and being the most polite partisan you ever met. If there's one thing that's missing, and I think probably on the weekend he needs to amp this up, is if you're making an emotional argument about how people should think about the country and the future and how they should deal with one another, you have to deliver it with a higher emotional content than I think we saw tonight.
Give us a quick last thought on Justin Trudeau on this, Andrew.
I agree. He doesn't have to, and he won't unveil a lot of policy substance until closer to the election. Right now, what he's got going from, as Bruce says, is he's warmer, he's less antagonistic certainly than Stephen Harper is. Coming closer to the election, he's going to actually have to convince people to give him the keys to the car, and he's got to counter those negatives that he's too much of a lightweight. He's got lots of time still to do that.
All right. You mentioned the Prime Minister. Yesterday had his session with Barack Obama. They had a joint news conference along with the Mexican president afterwards. But if you just look at the two clips of these two men, Barack Obama and Stephen Harper, it's interesting. Here they're talking they're talking about Keystone, but it boils down to their differences on some issues like climate change. Watch this.
I said previously that how Keystone impacted greenhouse gas emissions would affect our decision. But frankly, it has to affect all of our decisions at this stage because the science is irrefutable. We're already seeing severe weather patterns increase. That has consequences for our businesses, for our jobs, for our families, for safety and security.
On the issue of climate change, which is a shared concern, can the United States have similar targets at the international level? We already cooperate on several sectors in terms of emissions reductions. But in terms of climate change, I think the State Department report already was pretty definitive on that particular issue.
These two men are coming from different places on these issues, but a lot of people have been suggesting in these last couple of weeks and certainly the last couple of days that they don't get along. It's more than just policy. They don't like each other. Do we know that, Andrew?
I don't know if we know that. It wouldn't surprise me if there's not a lot of simpatico between them, but they're also getting business done, and I think they're able to, for the most part, to look past that. On this issue, what's striking is they're not really disagreeing per se, it's just sort of talking past each other. So, Obama says the science is irrefutable, Harper says the State Department report is definitive. Those two things are not incompatible with each other. You can believe the science is irrefutable and that the State Department has said that this would not contribute to climate change. But they're talking past each other. They're emphasizing their preferred themes for their preferred audiences.
Bruce?
Yeah, I don't think we know enough about the absolute chemistry of the relationship on other issues, but I think we can tell quite easily that on this issue the relationship is being tested. And frankly, I think from my standpoint as a citizen, I'd rather see evidence of a relationship being tested by a substantive issue like this than false bonhomie. I think the Prime Minister has made it clear over and over again that he believes there's a strong economic argument and not an environmental impact that needs to be a matter of grave concern, and he's got the State Department report to back that up. I think Mr. Obama is being a bit disingenuous in talking just about the climate change dynamic, because I think most observers know he doesn't need that long, or as long as it's taken to formulate a decision on this. And really what's going on is a political calculus about the fortunes of the Democratic Party.
Where do you come from on this, Althea?
Well, I mean, it's funny to hear Bruce say that, because, I mean, that's part of the Prime Minister's job, is to give the President of the United States a reason to say yes. And Stephen Harper has not done that. It's like that clip in Jerry Maguire where Tom Cruise's character says, "Help me, help you." You know, President Obama has said repeatedly for over a year, the number one thing for me is greenhouse gases. He said it in this speech yesterday. You know, we only have one planet. So all the Canadian government has to do is show that it is actually serious about reducing our carbon footprint, specifically the oil sands, and do something about it. And at least then you'll show goodwill. And the answer is simple. I just don't understand why they haven't done it.
You kind of had the opportunity in that newser yesterday to kind of embrace, could have at least agreed with them on the science issue. You didn't even go that far in that answer.
I'm not sure it's quite as simple as that. I agree it would help. But, you know, a president of the United States is always as powerful as the office seems, is always hemmed in by a lot of different constituencies and a lot of different institutional constraints. Clearly, as Bruce was saying, he's got to work with elements of the Democratic Party who are dead set against this no matter what kind of rational arguments you put forward. And you would think after the second or third, as Harper said, definitive report from the State Department that this would contribute nothing to increasing the amount of greenhouse gases in the world.
I think
you would think that would be enough.
I got
think that's
30
the critical
seconds
point.
left. You got the
I
quick
think
last word, Bruce.
I think that's the critical point. I agree that it's the job of the Prime Minister to try to find a way to get to yes. But I guess my point is, I don't think there is a way for the President to get to yes, at least not yet. At least not until he's done more of the math about the politics for the Democratic senators who are up for re-election, and from the standpoint of Democratic fundraising. I don't think substantive policy decisions made by the government right now in Canada would affect that calculus.
All right. Well, if there's one thing everybody can agree on, that this is taking an awfully long time to make a decision on. It's been years, and for who knows, it's certainly going to be months more. It may be years more.
And as we've seen, they give every sign, our government does, of looking past Obama to the next administration.
All right. And I guess that's part of Obama's problem. He's looking past too, but he wants to be a Democratic, administration next. And as you point out, Andrew, his party is very firmly on one side of this. Listen, we're out of time. Thank you all. Andrew and Althea in Montreal, Bruce in Ottawa.